Hi everyone, welcome back. It's Emma and today we're going to be doing my second tutorial video on phone photography, mobile photography. So today we're going to be going over a few more of the professional settings that you might find on your phone or on your tablet camera and how we can use those to create really cool, very creative, amazing pictures. So stay tuned. So you'll remember that last week we went over the composition basics of photography. So we went over what composition means, the rule of thirds, which is the most popular composition tool used in photography, and we went over how to focus on our subjects and really make it pop. And we talked about taking pictures of flowers and of landscapes and how to take really nicely composed pictures that draw attention to exactly what you want. Which is perfect, and I hope you've all been going out and practicing that and having some fun. So today we're going to move on to some more technical photography terms such as ISO, aperture and exposure. So let's get started. So last week I showed you how to get the grid lines up on your camera and how we use those to compose our images, to level everything, and to make sure that our subject matter is in the correct position in the viewfinder. This would be our viewfinder when you're taking a picture. So today we're going to move from the normal photo over to Pro, which gives us a few different settings at the bottom that we can manually control. So instead of the camera choosing everything for us, settings wise, we're going to decide what we want. My phone's kind of basic. It lets me control the ISO, which I'll explain in a moment, the white balance and the exposure of my photographs. Now I know that there are some phones out there, probably very fancy iPhones and all the newest ones that let you use much more detailed settings such as aperture. They're really useful to use, and if you've got those you should definitely play around with them. It's all about controlling the light that's coming into our pictures. Photography is using light to create a picture, so everything revolves around light, letting more light in, stopping light from entering the lens of our pictures. So we're always going to have our nice clean lenses when we start. Clean, and the light's going to be going through here, or if you're using that side, through there. So when we're thinking about light with our pictures, usually it's too dark, or I always find that things are too dark and I want my pictures to be brighter. So we have a few useful tools on our phone that we can use to give us more light than we actually have when we take a picture. So the first one I'm going to go into is ISO. ISO stands for the International Standards Organization, and it's basically a light sensitivity standard rating. So there's sort of a scale of light sensor that we use with digital cameras, and phones have that as well now, which is incredible. So it can let more light into the camera than you actually have in a scenario. So if I was taking a picture and it was quite late, but I was trying to capture more detail in something and I wanted a bit more light, I could go into my ISO ratings here. Let me see if I can show you on my camera. I'll pop up some examples. So that's my ISO. And at the minute it's on 400, but I have a sliding scale here. Can you see how that is? Let me see. Going brighter and going darker. Hopefully that'll show you. So if I was taking a picture of something and it was really dark, I could bump up that ISO. Mine has a range from 100 to 800. Your phone may go even higher. You shouldn't really ever need to go lower than 100. that would make it really dark. So if you're taking a picture of something and it was too bright, maybe the sun was really glaring, you could bring the ISO right the way down to 100 and it'll sort of darken your picture. You'll get a little bit more details or shadows and things like that. If it's the opposite way and it's too dark and you want to capture more light and details, you're not capturing anything with the light that you've got, you can slide that scale all the way up to 800 and you can sort of parry in between. It's most useful, I think, when you're taking pictures of people who are backlit. Backlit just means that the light is behind you. So say the sun, which is currently in front of me, lighting me, if that was behind me, I would be more silhouetted because all the light's hitting the back of my head, so it would be really bright here, but you wouldn't get any detail in someone's face. It was the same if you were taking pictures of landscape photography and all the light was behind it. You would lose a lot of the detail in shadow at the front. So you can bump up your ISO to bring in more light into the shadows of your photos. Or the opposite way, if it's too bright and you feel like you're losing detail and everything just looks white, you can bring the ISO down on your little slider scale on your phone and make the photo a little bit darker, and it'll just bring a bit more detail and a bit more contrast into your images. The next thing we're going to talk about today is white balance. So I studied film in Manchester, where I'm from, and white balance was one of the first things we learnt about. I had no idea that it existed before I studied it, but now it's something that's available on all of our phones, which is incredible. And it's just a way to control the colour of light. Now that phrase might sound a little strange, but every light, when you're using natural light, or light inside a building like fluorescence or just the bulbs that you have in your living room, they all have a colour. So if you look at the colour of the light bulb in your living room, for instance, they're usually yellow or orange, and they'll give that glow to everything. If you take a picture in that setting, everything will look kind of yellow or kind of orangey, which might work for you. And then if you're outside, the light is generally blue, which you'll probably notice now. As soon as you've learnt about it, you see it everywhere. So even without taking a picture, just with my naked eyes, I can tell if light's blue or yellow, even when I'm outside. So it's usually blue in natural light outdoors. Sometimes during sunsets you get really beautiful yellow golden light. You may have even heard of the term the golden hour. It's an hour right as the sun is setting where everything goes really beautiful golden yellow, and it's incredible for taking portraits and just for lighting the world in a different way, which I think is really cool. So on our phones we have a white balance setting automatically. So you'll see mine just says, is that in focus? I'm not sure. But it says auto just here, that's my white balance. But then if I click on it, it gives me these different options. So you can see there's like a light bulb for indoors, and then you'll have a cloud, and you'll have a fluorescent. I'll pop up a little picture of what it looks like because it's hard to see the glare, and you'll see the settings that I'm talking about. So your phone usually just selects an automatic white balance. Sometimes it works, but sometimes you might want to change the colour, the tone of your picture. So if everything's looking a little blue, you might want to have it look a bit warmer. You can always try and fake that sort of golden hour look. Or if everything's already kind of warm in tone in the picture and you want to make things look like it's icy or frosty, it's really great for winter photographs to make things look a little bit more blue. And you can control that using the white balance. So if I clicked on mine at the moment, just for this room, and I put fluorescence on. Fluorescents are those big long lights that are always flickering. They're awful to take pictures in, but to tone out the different sort of greens and blues that those lights give off, it kind of goes into this purple. thing. So you'll see I look kind of like pink and purple in that picture. And that's the fluorescent setting. Now if we go on incandescent, which just means it's light, either like candlelight, but usually just sort of the normal lights you get in your living room that are very yellow. So to contrast yellow, your phone will give you blue. So you'll see I would say I was fairly yellow at the minute, particularly if I get into the sunlight because it's setting at the moment. So if I use the incandescent one, you'll see it makes it look really blue and really frosty. And then we have cloudy, which is probably my favourite. It's really good to use if you're outside in natural light, and it's generally quite harsh and blue. Particularly in winter and spring, the light's really quite blue and white, and you can lose a lot of lovely colours. Anything coming out in spring that is that's pink or purple, or all those lovely reds and yellows that come out, the blue can kind of wash the vibrancy of those away. But if we go on cloudy, can you see it just warms up the whole picture? It's almost like a sepia tone. Can you see that? I know I look a little white in it. So yeah, cloud is probably one of my favourite ones to use because it warms up a picture, and I really like warm tones in my images. But it's a personal preference. If you prefer things cooler, then that's how it is. That's fine. And then the last one that we can control with our white balance is direct sunlight. So if you've all seen direct sunlight. It just means that it's really bright and really harsh light. So if there is a cloud in front of it, everything light-wise is really soft and hazy. It's really great for taking pictures in. But if you've got really bright, harsh sunlight, it can overwhelm a picture. It gives you really harsh shadows, and the tone's kind of all over the place. It's quite bright. So let's see, I'm facing it the wrong way for just a moment. I want to see if I can show you the difference between auto and direct sunlight. So auto at the minute, let me see. There we go. So auto is looking like this. Let's just take a picture of my door. White balance on auto. I would say that was fairly neutral, leaning towards green. Now, if I click the sunlight, can you see how that went slightly warmer? Almost a pink tone. We'll do it again to see if you can see. Auto, sunlight. Auto, sunlight. Can you see that? What I might do is pop a picture up of all those different white balance settings so you can see the differences side by side. But I think the sunlight setting is quite a good one when you're outside, because it can be quite blue and quite harsh, and that just really tones it down and makes it look really natural. It's incredibly flattering if you're taking pictures, portrait pictures, because it'll make your skin look really warm and healthy, like you've just been on a summer holiday, rather than sick and pale how we actually look because we're just coming out of winter. So that's the white balance setting. I hope that made sense to you. I might go over it again in a little bit more detail with some more example pictures later on in this video. So the last setting that I have on my phone anyway is the exposure. Exposure is the amount of light we're allowing into our pictures. Luckily we can control this, which is incredible. Back in the day it was very hard to control the amount of light that got in, so things might be too bright or they might be too dark. It's similar to ISO, but exposure is just your basic brightening really. If you've ever seen that setting before, I can make it bright or I can make it very dark. So super bright, about normal, darker, 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 darker. So I really like using exposure to make things darker than they actually are. Because if you're trying to take a picture and you want it to look sort of dark and moody, or you want to get lots of depth or texture into your images, which I really like if I'm taking pictures of flowers or of trees, by using the exposure, I'm actually manipulating the light, whereas my subject's really well exposed. So if I was taking a picture of a flower and I wanted the light to actually hit it, so I can pick up all that lovely detail or any patterns, but I don't want a really bright image. So if I bring the exposure down, it means that I'm getting what looks like a nighttime image, but with all the light at the daytime, so it's kind of the best of both worlds. I also like to use exposure for a few little tips and tricks using water images. Don't know if you've ever seen the hack where you can make water look like stars. I'll show you the picture that I took about 5 minutes ago, and then afterwards I'll explain how I did that using the exposure on my camera. So I really love that picture. I think it looks like stars in the night sky, or like a firework in black and white, maybe like a star's exploded. Just think it's really cool, and it took me maybe 10 seconds. So what I did was go into the bathroom, run my hand under the tap, and then flick the water onto the bathroom mirror. Held my phone up in front of it, and I chose these exact settings. I was on my pro mode. My exposure I brought all the way down, so it was super, super dark. And then I went up to my flash, and oh, go on. Popped my flash on, and that way, I'll take a picture for you guys. Boop. That was it. So then when you get that picture, by using the flash, it adds even more contrast to the image. So we're only lighting up the water because that's reflecting the light that we're bouncing at it. Does that make sense? So the flash has done a burst of light that's been reflected by the water in the mirror, and because we chose a really low exposure, everything else around that image was really dark. I did go into my editing, just my basic editing on my phone, and bring the contrast up and the shadows down. You should have all of those on your phone for editing, or if you don't have a shadows option, you should be able to just bring the exposure down even more and the contrast up, and that just gives you that really great black and white pop image. But I think that's a really cool hack, and you could do it in loads of different patterns as well. And yeah, I think that's a really good one to try out. It's a really good way of playing with exposure, understanding how it works, and you're also using the flash on your camera to bounce light just to create something. So give that hack a go. I think it's a really cool one. And you could even go into editing afterwards and change the colour. So instead of having a white star, you can make it red or blue or purple. But yeah, give that a go and let me know what you think. Okay, so next we're going to talk about Aperture. Now, that's a tool that I don't have on my phone personally, but I know it is on a lot of people's phones, or you may be able to have it on your iPad or your tablet. If you don't have it and you want to get it, you can download photography apps that have all the professional settings, and that's a really cool way to get to play around with these without buying a super expensive camera. So Aperture, the way I like to think of Aperture is the pupil in your eye through this bad boy. So aperture in a lens means that the pupil of the lens opens and closes just the way that our eyes would, to either let in more light or to restrict light from getting in. So you know, if you've ever just opened your eyes and they'll go really big at first and then they'll close, because when we're only looking at darkness like that, our pupils are going to go really, really big to let in as much light as possible, and then when you open your eyes, they're going to restrict slightly because there's an influx of light. So if you're in a dark room, your pupils are going to go really, really big. That's exactly what we're going to do with our aperture on our phone. If we're in a dark room, or if you're outside and it's dark, you're going to want your aperture in the lens, your pupil, to be as wide as possible to let in as much light as we can to capture everything, all the details and everything in our picture that we want. And then the opposite way, if it's really, really bright, like if you're taking a picture in the middle of a summer's day and you've got that big bright sun high up in the sky and it's beaming down, and it's just going to bleach out your picture. Everything will look white. So to restrict the light coming in, just like our pupil would, you make the aperture close up like that. Now your aperture numbers go in opposite directions. So the higher the aperture, the smaller the pupil. The lower the aperture number, the wider the pupil. That's how I like to think of it. The lens of your camera works just the same as your eye, and I like to think the shutter, when we take a picture, is us blinking. So if you're lucky enough to have Aperture on your phone, you can play around with that and you can see how it lets in light and restricts light depending on your situation. It's also a really great way of getting that nice blurry background, the bokeh we were talking about last week. If you have a really low aperture, which means the pupil is really, really wide, letting in lots of light, it gives you naturally a really lovely blurry background, but you don't want it to be too white, so you've got to make sure you've got a lower exposure to make up for that. So if you're playing around with the pro settings on your phone and you've got aperture, try having it really, really wide open. So really low number, and that'll give you a nice blurry background, but make sure that your exposure is a little lower so that you don't have a really super bright picture. But give that a go and let me know what you think. If you don't have Aperture on your phone, I'm sorry about that whole segment and if it didn't make sense to you, but you can download photography apps with those professional settings so you can try them all out, which I hope you do because it's really good fun. So I'm going to show you some example pictures now, just reviewing all of those terms that we went over today, just so that you understand them, and that when you're taking pictures you can visually see what it should be looking like. So here's an example of a high exposure and a low exposure picture. And here is an example of all the different white balance options that we talked about today. And here are some examples of ISO and how it can help lift light in dark situations. And finally, here are some cool aperture examples to show how we let in light, how we restrict light, and how we get that lovely blurry background by using aperture on our cameras. So I hope you enjoyed the second tutorial in our mobile photography workshops. I would say that was probably part 2 of an introduction to photography. It's quite complicated, all of those settings. The best way to learn really is just to grab your camera and give it a go. Practice makes perfect, make some mistakes, fix them, see what works for you, see what you enjoy taking a picture of, especially in colour tones. Everyone has a personal preference. So the way that I said I like things to be a bit warmer and a bit darker, you might like them to be a bit brighter or like bluish green. So it's entirely up to you. Have fun with those settings and be creative. I hope you've all had a good week and you've took some great pictures, and I hope this gives you a bit of a boost to go out and take some more, get a bit more creative. So we're going to wrap it up there today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you've been trying out these techniques and it's given you a bit of inspiration to go out and take some cool pictures and play around with them. Next week we're going to be talking about perspectives and angles and how to get really cool images that are not quite what you would always see, sort of capturing the world from a different point of view. I'll go into it more next week. I've got some really cool tips and tricks to share with you. I hope you're enjoying these videos and that you're all keeping well and staying safe. So I'll see you next week. Bye guys.